So I'll start tonight with a poem that many of you are familiar with. So if you'd like to just close your eyes and take in these words and just think for a moment about this notion of freedom from fear particularly. That seems to be a very prevalent one. So the peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So today marks the beginning of the second half of this calendar year. We begin a new month, just days away from the summer solstice, and it's been a summer filled with lots of firefly light. The 4th of July is almost upon us, and this, of course, is when we celebrate this nation's freedom. So what do we mean by freedom? And what makes for freedom? Well, there's a kind of a external freedom that we talk about, particularly this time of year, around the 4th of July. And that might be termed a freedom as license. So it's freedom as an escape from tyranny. And these freedoms of license would include freedom of speech, freedom of press, also freedom of conscience, and freedom of movement. And this last one, freedom of movement, I think we often take for granted that we are able to go wherever we want. And I had a small taste of what it's like not to have freedom of movement when I was teaching out at the Fluvanna Women's Prison one night many years ago. And the time of our class ended, and a thunderstorm came up. And we were told by the guards that we could not leave. We would be in that building until they deemed it was safe to leave. And in that moment, I felt the steel bars closing. And I was aware of this wide range of feelings of irritation. Wait, you can't tell us we can't go. Of anger, of guilt, of sadness. And so I think this notion of freedom of movement is one that, although it's an external freedom, it's one that we don't pay much attention to at times, unless we have been in prison or jailed. So the Declaration of Independence proclaims many of these freedoms, and here's what it says, though not quite in this particular word order. It says, by the laws of nature, freedom is equal station of all people with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By the laws of nature, equal station of all people with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you might say that these freedoms that are enumerated in the Declaration are ones that are from the outside, so they're conveyed. Most of them are encoded in law, but they're based on our agreements, our understanding about these rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we talk about these rights being guarded, and they're also regarded as our country's most precious possession, words that you hear again around this time of year. They've become the mottos of our public life, though we know, sadly enough, that they are not the realities for everyone living here. Here, where we hold equality of all beings as self-evident. And we share a responsibility to uphold these laws of nature. So in a few days, the country's going to celebrate the 4th, and there'll be picnics, fireworks, and speeches about freedom, freedom from constriction, from tyranny, from bondage. And some of us have been, or maybe you're going, up to Monticello on the 4th to witness the oath that some individuals are taking to become naturalized citizens of this nation. And that's a part of a path that they have followed so that they can have the experience of greater external freedom. And they remind us that this word freedom is a momentous concept externally for all of us. Tonight, what I'd like to do is shift the perspective a little bit and talk about another kind of freedom, and that is freedom as spiritual autonomy. Most of us can acknowledge that we have a lot of the external freedoms, but when you ask yourself the question, am I free internally? Maybe some of the time. But there are other times when we feel the tyranny, the bondage of this mind with its thoughts. We like to imagine that we're free, but as the American monk Bhikkhu Bodhi says, true freedom is still as distant as the clear blue sky beyond the steel bars of our celled thoughts and feelings, beyond the steel bars of our celled thoughts and feelings. So the question is, what makes for true freedom? What's the path that makes for freedom beyond those steel bars? 2,500 years ago, the Buddha offered us teachings that he said serve as a pathway to freedom, to that spiritual autonomy. And what he said about his teaching was really simple. He said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. And the end, of course, being that internal freedom, freedom as spiritual autonomy. One of the analogies he used was looking at the ocean to help listeners understand the nature of liberation. He said, just as in the great ocean there is but one taste, the taste of salt, so in this teaching and discipline, that's important to remember. We hear the word teaching, but sometimes we forget discipline. So in this teaching and discipline, there is but one taste, the taste of freedom. So you go down to the ocean, down if you're on the East Coast, but go to any ocean and you sample the water on the surface or down at 30 feet or 300 feet or even at 30,000 feet. And what do you find? The taste of the water is the same. It's the taste of salt. If you could, you wouldn't, but if you could drink a thimbleful of the salt water or a bucketful, the taste would be the same and it would be present throughout. So in the same manner, a single flavor, the flavor of freedom, pervades the entire teachings of the Buddha from beginning to end, from a gentle surface to unfathomable depths. The teachings that constitute the path have the same flavor of freedom throughout, and you can taste it whether you are at the beginning of this practice or whether you've been practicing for years. There's something about that taste of freedom that has drawn you here. It's a reason that most of us come to this practice. There's a taste of freedom here. And most of us know that this practice, this path requires some kind of aspiration, some kind of discipline and diligence and a commitment. And what it offers to us in return is a release from that tyranny. So what happens without the practice? We can read the teachings, but without the practice, what happens is that we're drawn to anything that seems pleasant. We're clinging in that direction, and we're avoiding, with great aversion, anything that's distasteful or hateful or not pleasurable. And we're sometimes trapped in our patterns of compulsion and impulsiveness. Or we're swimming around and around in states of confusion. And you might notice sometimes how, if the practice is weak, that we're subject to the volatility, the rise when things are great, when our small self is being honored or praised in some way, and the dejection, the fall, when there's loss, or when there's humiliation, or when there's blame. We can have some notion sometimes that a particular action won't be particularly wise right now, but there's some way in which we don't have the ability to avoid it. So, for example, maybe you've had some experience with this. In a moment of hunger, you know that it's really not wise to eat that whole bag of potato chips. But it's also sometimes so difficult to go to the bowl of spinach. Or ruminating on an angry burst of words from some conversation with someone at work or at home. And that conversation gets spinning right here. We're going round and round. Can you believe? What was she thinking? What am I going to do now? And the mind refuses to let go. And when we touch into this suffering, we are attending to the first noble truth, that there is suffering. And we're instructed to develop a diligence to have some intolerance for suffering. It's so easy sometimes just to turn away from it, or ignore it, or just push it aside. And we're being asked to not do that, to have some intolerance for suffering, to turn toward it. So, I'm driving around for an appointment, and I'm thinking about, I wonder what's going to happen at this appointment. I wonder what's going to be said. What am I going to say? What are they going to say? And I've forgotten all about my driving. Well, let's hope not everything, but I'm paying attention to up ahead. What's looming out there up ahead? I'm unaware of any tightness that's crept into my mind, or my shoulders rise when I get tight. I don't know about you, but you know how you get tight. Your belly freezes, your hands sweat, your forehead, your jaw clenches. We know these places. There's subtle suffering going on here. Maybe we all need a bumper sticker for the car or the bike that says, "I stop for suffering." Sometimes we choose really subtle waves of suffering. We choose an orientation to the world that feels like it gives us a sense of safety or security. Or we sometimes choose a way of suffering that allows us, or we think it allows us, to be seen in a particular way by other people. And you could think, for example, of any time you've played the role of woe is me. Oh, how many emails I have in my box. My to-do list is so long. Yada, yada, yada. So how it is that we use suffering to prop up a sense of this small self at times, or how we want others to respond to us in relationship to that suffering. So let's do a little exercise right here to reflect on your favorite way of suffering. Can hardly wait, right? Your favorite way of suffering. So if you would, just close your eyes for a moment. Just pausing. Allowing some ease to come into those perennially tight places in your body. Maybe taking a couple of deep breaths. Signal the body to relax, let go. And then reflecting for a moment on one of your favorite ways to suffer. Maybe opening to a recent experience of your tolerance for suffering when you avoided turning towards something that was uncomfortable. Or a time when you put up with something, you tolerated the status quo for the sake of the ambition or the goal in that moment. Or maybe a time when you shut down, you denied what was really going on in an effort to feel safe. See if you can, without judging that in any way, just pause and look at that aversion, that small aversion, that tightness in the mind and the heart. Not judging it in any way. Just aware of your relationship to that experience. Allowing whatever's arising. The movement toward, the movement away from that which is. And then releasing this and just coming back to the breath, sensing your contact with the earth. And opening your eyes. And if you would, in this moment, just turn to the person sitting beside you or behind you or in front of you and just reflect for a moment on what you discovered in this reflection of looking at your own favorite way of suffering. So one more minute to wrap up. So maybe just briefly thanking your partner and swearing them to secrecy. So what makes for true freedom? The Buddha had some advice for us about exploring the possibility of freedom each time you make a choice. So you could look at where freedom is constantly showing itself in the fact that your present intentions aren't completely conditioned by your past. There's that possibility. Freedom begins where you can see the range of possibilities from which you can choose. See your ability to act a little differently, maybe a little more skillfully in any situation. And your sense of this freedom will grow as you explore and exercise it. Each time you choose the most skillful action in this moment, you're heading in this direction of greater discernment, of truthfulness, and of some peace, some freedom, some spaciousness. Throughout his teachings, the Buddha offered a simple formula that you could follow. And basically what this is that whatever is unskillful, leading to harm or suffering for you and for others, should be recognized and abandoned. Sounds pretty easy, right? Whatever is skillful, leading to happiness and peace for you and others, is what should be pursued. Gosh, it sounds so easy. So we keep sitting. We keep practicing to seek freedom. And what we find as we sit, that when we open the heart-mind, we find that it's already there. So this discipline of practicing allows us to see the phenomenal degree of choice that we have in any moment. We learn to trust the spaciousness of awareness, and we can watch the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows come and go and come and go. Be a lamp unto yourself, said the Buddha. Your efforts will light the way, but you must do this for yourself. This means that each of us must cultivate the seeds of intention, of careful attention, of mindfulness. We must water the ground of trust and of curiosity. We must eradicate the weeds of hatred, greed, and delusion. And we must enrich the soul with enrich the soil with large applications of patience and compassion. When the Buddha says, be a lamp unto yourself, he means that no one can do the great work of the heart and spirit for us. No one can love for us, no one can let go for us. The path to ending suffering is one that we walk by ourselves. But the good news is that we have support. We have lots of signposts and guides on this path to liberation. In fact, we really have all the signposts we could possibly need. We've got the Four Truths, the Eightfold Path, the practices of sila, or ethical behavior, practices of mindfulness, and cultivating the Brahma-viharas, compassion, kindness, equanimity. These are all our guides. And each one of them helps to keep us focused and connected to our practice on this path to freedom. We're also encouraged to hold this path with some degree of lightness. It's easy to become a little serious and too serious sometimes. So I like what Pema Chodron has to say about this. She says, like children at play, like a hot elephant diving into a lake, like a joyful horse or a breeze of delight, bring some enthusiasm to the task. And we have another jewel on this path. And you've encountered it tonight. It's this Sangha. It's all these people you're sitting with who are on the same path. And they're here to journey with you. We support each other. And we make it through the rocky sections of this path. And we jump into the lake together. We learn too, as Nelson Mandela has written, being free not merely to cast off our own chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others, the interdependence of freedom. So as this 4th of July approaches and the country commemorates independence that began in revolution, we celebrate external freedom and internal freedom. The freedom of the heart and the mind, a space so open and so wide that it encompasses everything. Recognizing that freedom as spiritual autonomy is possible for every one of us. It's our birthright. Mind as spacious as the sky with day-blind stars and irrepressible firefly light, judging nothing as inferior, holding it all with equanimity. The taste of freedom is here, now. Thank you for listening and for your own efforts in finding this taste of freedom. Thank you.